Hello and welcome to Fire in the Belly. Today we have myself, Mighty Pete, and we have the Dr. John Demartini. Good afternoon to you, I think.
Thank you. It is afternoon still.
Welcome on to the show. Listen, it's an absolute privilege and honor to have you on. So thank you for taking the time to come and chat with us today. So yeah, tell us, first of all, what does Fire in the Belly mean to you?
Well, I think the adage, the statement has always been somebody who is absolutely inspired and enthused to fulfill something deeply meaningful to them. They're willing to do relentlessly the actions it takes to achieve things. And I think having fire in the belly means you found what you want to dedicate your energies to, and you're committed to it, and you let nothing stop you from the outcome, and you're inspired to do it.
I mean, how common or uncommon do you think that is?
Well, I think that many people compare themselves to others and attempt to be somebody they're not, and cloud the clarity of what they're really, truly, deeply, meaningfully committed to, and shroud some of the greatness they have inside, which curtails the expression of the fire in the belly sometimes, because they're living by shoulds and ought tos and supposed to, instead of actually building momentum and enorming. So I think that it is graded. There are fewer in number that are committed, and a greater number of people are hesitant and worried about what other people think, and pretend they don't know what's in their heart that they want to go and contribute. But it's not everybody that has that fire to the fullest extent. So it gets rare as you get to the top that are truly, truly fired and inspired inside.
That's super interesting. I mean, you mentioned there to know in your heart. I mean, is that, where does that come from, that knowing in your heart, do you think?
Well, each of us have a set of priorities, a set of values that we live our life by. And whenever, I call this the hierarchy of values. And whenever we're living in alignment and congruent with what we value most, the thing that truly does inspire us, and that's where the fire comes. And that's where we feel we're deeply inspired and grateful for getting to do it. When we get to structure our life by priority and we're grateful for the opportunity to do what we really love doing, we pick up that fire and they want. And they're frightened that they're not intelligent enough. They're frightened that they might fail at it. They're frightened that they might not make money at it. They're frightened that they might lose money at it. They're frightened that they might, not be appreciated by their loved ones. They're afraid they might get rejected. They fear they may not have the health, the physical fitness or looks to do it, or they feel that they might break the morals and ethics of some spiritual authority if they do it. And so they cloud that clarity instead of giving themselves permission to shine and really radiate that fire. And I think that, again, they're fewer in number, but greater in fire as you go up to the levels of congruency and living authentically according to what they really value. But most people are frightened to do that. They're worried about other people's opinion instead of letting their voice and a vision on the inside become profound.
Typically then, I mean, so if there's a gap between who we truly are and who we are today, that incongruency, if you like, where typically does that happen? I mean, there's a split at some point, right? I mean, there has to be a separation, a fractioning of some sort.
Well, the fractioning is the comparison. The moment we compare ourselves to others and put people on pedestal and depend on them, or put people in pits, we're going to distract ourselves because we're going to try to make ourselves live in their values, which is futile, or try to get others to live in our values, which is futile, instead of giving ourselves permission to do what we really would love to do, which isn't futile, it's utile, and doing it in a way that serves other people with utility. And if we go out and care enough about others to find out what's meaningful to them and not sacrifice for them, but to fair exchange a transaction with them, we'll get to do what we love and they'll get to do what they love. And this is the secret of excelling and building momentum, building a brand and achieving. So we got to give ourselves permission to be authentic Because that's, being number one at being ourselves is better than being number two at being somebody else. And sacrificing for others altruistically will eventually get us to be narcissist. And narcissistically trying to get others to live in our values will eventually humble us into altruism. But trying to be authentic and having a fair exchange keeps us sustainable and steady. And so, yeah, when we live congruently in our highest values, we have the highest probability of doing that. Living objectively, living with an inspiration. The highest value has been known for centuries, all the way back to the ancient Greeks, to be the key to a fulfilling life. If you fill your day with high priority actions that inspire you, it doesn't fill up with low priority distractions that don't. And if you fill your day with challenges that inspire you, it doesn't fill up with low priority challenges that don't. So the key is to prioritize what you're doing, what you're reading, what you're thinking, who you're hanging out with, what you're spending your money on, and take command of it. Live by design, not just by duty.
And it's a beautiful way of looking at it there, that actually it is, I mean, that's almost, is it conscious, it's unconscious that you are deciding to live in that point, and even, I notice obviously on you talk about awakening your astronomical vision. That's a gift that you give out through your website as well. That's a future pacing, right, of what you have in your potential, yet your past and your, all the things, the egoic mind, if you like, comes into play and pulls you back. So how do you strike the balance between the two?
Well, everything that you judge, that you infatuate with or resent, the impulses that you seek and the instincts that you try to avoid, is going to occupy space and time in your mind and weigh you down. And so anytime you're infatuated with something, you're conscious of the upside and unconscious of the downside. So that's a form of ignorance, because you're only seeing one side. And every time you're resentful to something, you're conscious of the downsides and unconscious of the upsides. And again, another form of ignorance, which weighs you down. But if you actually go and live by your highest value, and you go into your executive center, you become less subjectively biased, become more objective and balanced in your perspective. And when you see both sides, you're not distracted from the external world in the amygdala. You're in your executive center and you're focusing on strategic planning, inspired vision, executing plans, and self-governance and self-reliance. And so this is the key, is prioritization is the key to moving forward, and not only is your mission. So I don't let the things of the past, I always say that no matter what's happened in the past, it's ultimately on the way. And extracting meaning out of those with and the other sides of the thing you resent allows you to center yourself back into the mean, and extract meaning out of your existence. And when you do, you're fueled to move forward without past distractions, and you're more clear and inspired about your mission. So I always say the quality of your life is basically the quality of the questions you ask. Your intuition is constantly trying to whisper great questions to liberate you, and asking how is, no matter what's happening, how is it helping you in the past is baggage. Anything you can say thank you for is fuel.
It's to have that perception. I mean, does that, for you to be able to view the past almost as a separate entity and then, take the vision, is that something that happens in the subconscious mind, or how do you separate yourself out from that? Because that's not sort of standard thinking, if you would like, I would suspect.
I have no interest in standard thinking. Standard thinking leads to a standard life. So that's not my modus operandi. Your subconscious mind stores all past judgments and gives rise to all impulses and instincts that distract you from your mission. Your superconscious mind is everything that you balanced objectively, that you pursued with, and mitigating the risk and neutralizing it, and you're pursuing something that's deeply meaningful to you. So when you have your superconscious mind superposed on top of your subconscious mind, and it's stronger than the subconscious mind doesn't distract you. If you fill your day with high priority actions that inspire you, your day doesn't fill up with low priority distractions that don't. You're too busy doing what you love doing. I delegate everything. I don't do anything but research and teach. So I don't have any distractions, because there's nothing that can come in to distract me, because I have people taking care of those things. So you want to surround yourself with people that are experts on doing the things that you weigh yourself down, that devalue you. If you're not filling your day with the really highest priority things and you're doing low priority things, you're going to devalue you and you're going to feel unfulfilled. But if you hire somebody to do those and delegate those and go on to do the highest priority things that you spontaneously are inspired to do, delegate the rest of it away. And then hire people that are inspired to do what you want to delegate. And your life's different. I don't do accept anything but research and teaching. Everything else has been delegated away. I haven't cooked since I was 24. I haven't driven a car in 30 years. I don't do domestic duties. I don't do cleaning. I don't do trash. I don't do domestic things because I can pay somebody $20 an hour to do that. I can make thousands of dollars or hundreds of thousands of dollars an hour. Why would I pay somebody do something that's a $20 an hour job? You devalue yourself every time you do low priority things, and you weigh yourself and life down. And most people haven't figured this out. They think it costs to delegate. It pays to delegate if you delegate properly.
That's an interesting thing. I mean, in terms of valuing yourself, I mean, how does one go about valuing yourself?
Anytime you live by highest priorities and your highest values, your self-worth goes up. Anytime you live by lower values, your self-worth goes down. It's really simple. There's no rocket science here. It's just taking the time to get really clear about what is really important to you. I have on my website a value determination process that's an objective way of doing it and looking at what your life demonstrates is really important. Because if you ask people what their values are, they'll tell you a bunch of social idealisms, which is BS. They'll tell you honesty and truth and peace and all the stuff that's social BS. I want to know what you're really committed to. I want to know what you have the fire in your belly about. I want to know what you're truly inspired to do and structure your life along that and liberate yourself from those trivialities that society is expecting from you and give yourself permission to shine and go out there and build momentum doing something extraordinary. So that's not going to happen if you sit there and lie to yourself about what priorities are. You have to get really honest about what's really spontaneously meaningful to you to do and give yourself permission to do it in a way that serves other people so you're recompensated for it, remunerated for it handsomely, and then delegate. And I'm absolutely certain that's doable. I've taken thousands and thousands of people through processes to help them do that and liberated them from a life of mediocrity to something extraordinary. I've been doing it 48 years, so I have no question left in my mind about how it can be done. It's just a matter of doing it. People want complexity, thinking they got these complex things to do. It's really simple. Prioritize your life. Wake up. It's that simple. People don't believe it's that simple. People keep doing low priority things and wondering why they can't get ahead.
I mean, there's an expression, you know, the your voids are your values, and it's something, you know, I think it's a bit of a cautionary tale. I mean, what do you make of that, and how do you test a value for its actual validity and its application?
Well, I've been doing that 43 years, so I have certainty about the validity of it. This has been known since the time of Aristotle. He said the exact same thing. Your voids determine your values. So if you look carefully, whenever you infatuate with somebody and you're unconscious of the downside, that's an emptiness. You're blind. You're not seeing. You're too humble to admit what you see in others inside you. You're blind to the downsides in them. You're blind to the upsides in you. And you're comparing and you're putting people on pedestals and minimizing yourself. And that's a disowned part. That's a void. And if you resent somebody and look down on them, you exaggerate yourself. And you're too proud to admit what you see in them as inside you with pride. And that's also a disowned part. And all those disowned parts are voids that want to be filled, because we're not going to be fulfilled trying to get rid of part of ourselves or trying to deny parts of ourselves. I'm not here to be nice. I'm not here to be kind. I'm not here to be one-sided. That's a moral hypocrisy that's taught by churches that screw people's minds up. We're human beings. We have both sides. If you support me, I can be nice. If you challenge me, I can be mean. I can be kind. I can be cruel. I can be open and closed. I can be honest. I can be dishonest. I'm a human being. I don't need to get rid of any part of myself to love myself. I don't have to get rid of some part of myself to improve myself. When I finally realize that I need to be whole and I can embrace both sides of myself, you have fulfillment. But trying to get rid of half of yourself and trying to find fulfillment will be futile. And so often people don't realize that the voids are all the disowned parts that we're not willing to own in ourselves. And that drives our values which are events and a journey of destiny to try to fill those. So I just realized that whatever I see in others that I admire or despise, it's inside me. It's not missing. So I look for it, own it, thank them for revealing it to me, and then don't have to hide any part of myself or try to prove a part of myself. I just get focused on what's priority. And it's a liberating state when you realize nothing's missing ultimately.
And for yourself, are you able to self-reflect in that way? Can you see your own reflection, your own perception, or does it take a master mirror holder to actually help you to see that language? I mean, where are you at in that?
I think it's dependent. I went over 35 years ago, I went to an Oxford dictionary, the largest dictionary I could find. And neurotically, I went through that entire dictionary and circled every word that a human behavioral trait could be displayed in. Kind, cruel, nice, mean, honest, dishonest, considered, inconsiderate, pleasant, unpleasant, peaceful, wrathful, generous, stingy, everything. And I circled every human behavioral trait. I found 4,628 traits in that dictionary. As I went through those, and I then thought of who in my life do I know that displays that trait to the fullest, most extreme example. I put their initial there. Then I looked in my life where and when I displayed and demonstrated that behavior. And I looked at each moment in my life I did until I kept looking and kept looking and kept looking until I could see that I had it as much as I saw in the most extreme person. When I reflected and introspected that thoroughly, I found out I had every trait. Nothing was missing in me. That's why I didn't need to improve. I didn't add. I didn't need to subtract. And trying to get rid of something is going to be futile. You're not going to get rid of it. People have these moral hypocrisies that you think you're supposed to be one-sided. You can't. It's a lie. It's the fastest way to disempower people, promoting a fantasy that people can't live by. So I gave that up in 1983, 1984. When I turned 30, I stopped that. I said, this is a waste of time. I'm interested in being me. No matter what I've done or not done, I'm still worthy of love. And I basically realized instead of trying to get rid of half of myself and put on a facade for people, I'm just going to be me. And I'm going to go and pursue what I feel deeply meaningful to. And I'm going to make sure it serves other people and it gives other people permission to do something extraordinary with their life. And that really did make a difference in the catapulting me to do what I do today and get to be and have the life I have today.
Would you, I mean, is that a life of alignment? Is that a life of freedom? You know, how would you describe that sort of, yeah, I mean, that sort of acceptance, I suppose, of what is and what you are?
Well, I set out when I was 18 to 20 years old, and then those 2 years writing down goals about how I want to be in my life. And I realized that I wanted to live by design, not duty. I didn't want to have to fit in. I wanted to stand out. I want to be an unborrowed visionary, not a borrowed visionary. And so I started mapping out what I really would love to do. If I could have it exactly the way I want with my magic wand, what would it look like? And so I wanted to create a masterful life. And my definition of a masterful life was creating original ideas that served. There were original creative ideas that served people. I wanted to create a business that was international. I wanted to create, financial independence. I wanted to create, a global family. I didn't want to live in a little suburb like that, in a little house. I wanted to live, like I do now. I live on a ship that goes around the world. It's the biggest yacht in the world. I wanted to go and have social influence and meet movers and shakers on the planet that are global. I wanted to actually have vital energy and have a strong body. I'm 66 going on 67. I got more energy than most people. And I wanted to make some sort of an inspired movement on the planet. I didn't want to follow a culture. I wanted to create a culture. I set out to do that. And that's exactly what's happened today. All of those are real today. And so I'm absolutely certain you can live by design and not have to live always subordinating to what people expect from you. I've traveled in 154 countries speaking. I've seen all different types of cultures, all different types of belief systems and morals and hypocrisies. I'm not interested in trying to fit in any one box. I'm interested in creating my own box, my own world. And in the process of doing it, make sure that that world serves people and serves people in their world. Because I'm a firm believer that you can translate what inspires to you and do it in a way that translates into inspiration for others. And I think that's been demonstrated in my life. And that's freedom. The freedom is that, you know what freedom is? Freedom is the freedom of being able to express what's inspiring to you when you have your own constraint. You prioritize your life and have internal constraint. people who can't constrain themselves with self-discipline and self-reliance and self-governance automatically have to be constrained from the outside world. And people that can't live with equanimity and equity within them into doing it without. So I'm a firm believer in living a more authentic and self-actualized life. It's absolutely doable. There's no reason why you can't do that, no matter where you start. I didn't start that way. I started out living on the streets when I was a kid. I was a high school dropout. I literally panhandled as a kid when I was 1968. I used to go into diners for food. So I know what it's like to be impoverished. I know what it's like to be pushed around. I also know what it's like to have a royal life today. So to me, it's dreaming about how you want your life and then making a master plan to make it happen. There's nothing stopping you, I guarantee you. There's nothing on the external world that has to stop somebody if they've got a belly in the fire in the belly. As you say, fire in the belly is the key. Are you truly inspired by what a goal that you want? Then let nothing stop you. When you have a relentless pursuit of that and there's no turning back, it's yours. Divine providence and human sovereignty meet.
Do you think everyone has a fire in the belly?
Do they have the potential to have it? Absolutely. Do they have it? No. Most people are comparing themselves to other people, distracting themselves, diluting the fire, burning themselves out, trying to be somebody they're not, and subordinating to other people, clouding the clarity of their mission, and not accessing it. I see it every weekend in my Breakthrough Experience program, the signature program I've been teaching for 32 years. I see people coming in at all different gradations of awareness. But is it possible to wake it up? Absolutely. Do I get to see it wake up every weekend? Yep. So it doesn't matter where you start. It's a matter of, are you now going to follow the principles that stand the test of the fire in the belly?
I mean, having done all those, all those breakthrough sessions, I mean, are there common entities that you see? Are there, are humans fundamentally near identical and just in slightly different manners? What's your lessons and learnings from all that?
Well, there's patterns. There's definitely patterns of human behavior, no doubt. We live in a hierarchical structure. There are grid cells and place cells with a hierarchy. And as long as we subordinate to people, we're going to inject their values. If we subordinate ourselves to people, we're going to project our values. If we level the playing field and reflect and have some sort of respect for somebody, we'll get to communicate dialogue within values. And dialogue between people is more empowering and sustainable than injections or projections. Because if we inject values, we're going to try to live in their lives. We're not. We're going to envy them and imitate them and be second. And we project them. We're going to try to get them to live our lives. And neither one of these are going to be sustainable. They're futile because people have a unique set of values that they want to live by. And so giving yourself freedom to learn to live by the highest value, where you're most objective, where you're most equitable, and where you have the most fair exchange, and you're willing to embrace the two sides of your life and other people's lives, allows you the most resilience and adaptability to achieve something great.
I was super interested. I mean, I think in one of your earlier videos that I was watching is you actually, you separate out and you distinguish between inspiration and motivation as the two separate, and I'm assuming that's like a push-pull factor, that what are you better to be motivated or to be inspired? Can you just break that apart for us a little bit?
Well, motivation is a symptom, not a solution. If you have to motivate people, they're not inspired. Intrinsic motivation, or inspiration as I call it, is a calling from within. And external motivation is when somebody tells you have to do it. It's duty. We have the ability to live what is called ontology or deontology. Ontology is lived by design, deontology is lived by duty. One is inspired from within because you design it, and the other is pushed from without because you're having to do it. Anytime you go to a job, when you go for a work, nobody goes to work for the sake of a company. They go to work to fulfill what's meaningful to them. If they can see how the job description and the purpose of the company is going to help them fulfill it, they'll be engaged and they're inspired and they're grateful for their job. But if they can't see it and they're disengaged, they're going to cost their own life and they're going to cost the company's life. They're going to cost the economy, and they're going to need constant motivation and pushing crap uphill all day long to get them to do things. That's not how to live. So motivation is a symptom. It's never a solution for humanity. I'm not a motivational speaker. I'm a person who educates people on how to live inspired lives. And there is a distinct difference. And there's a science of it, and it's duplicatable, and it's guaranteed to work. There's no question. I've been doing it a long time. 48 years is a pretty good long time. I'm absolutely certain if you apply principles, you'll get a result. It's just a matter of learning the principles and applying.
I mean, when you look at that inspiration, is that I mean, do we all have one sort of core message or in purpose inside us, or is it more of a cross banding that is, you know, that's a capability, put it like that, and we can apply it to different ideas or different potential? I don't know. I'm maybe not being clear, but I'm just wondering, you know, is it a state of being as
At
opposed to
any
a
one
thing?
moment, at any one moment, you have a hierarchy of values, and whatever is highest is what the purpose is about. But that can change. You can tweak and evolve as you go. I always say your life's journey is a summation of your destinies, and the hierarchy of your values are dictating your destinies along the way. And what they can change. They can change gradually or punctate cataclysmically. So that means that they can change little by little, or they can change radically. A person can have a baby, or a person can have a loss of a baby, or a person can get married, or all of a sudden get divorced, and their values can shift. And as a result of it, their trajectory shifts. But whatever it is in their highest value at that time is the direction. Now, if you find something that's a real core value that stays with you, like myself, which is teaching, and you find a way of mastering it, loving it, you may do that for 30, 40, 50 years, 60 years. You know, I recently filmed in a movie with Stephen Hawking, and Stephen Hawking, since he was young, he wanted to know the laws of the universe. He wanted to find the general law that applied the theory of everything. You know, that was his goal, the general law, the gut, grand unified theory. He'd been wanting to do that since he was pretty young. So some people work their lives on that. Other people might have something for a decade and go on to the next thing. They may have created a big company, sold that company, go on and create another big company. So it depends on what it is, but whatever's highest on your value is the mission at the time. You have a vast potential inside you, but you're going to maximize your potential if you live congruently by what you currently have as a value. Highest value.
Talking about that, and those values and those shifts over time. I mean, do humans have seasons? Do we have, you know, do we fluctuate through, you know, 7-year cycles, 10-year cycles? Because I mean, the value set of I'm sure of a 7-year-old, 14, 21, whatever, you know, is going to change fundamentally, right? You know, it's different sets, different needs. Is that built into us, or is that a?
Well,
Is
in most cases, in most cases, that's true. Although I did a young adults inspired destiny program in Johannesburg to 128 students, and they were 13 to 21 years of age. And they spent the day with me. And there was a 13-year-old boy there that started at age 4, and he decided he wanted to be a brain surgeon. Now, he's read every book on brain surgery in South Africa that's available that any brain surgeon would get access to. He got a hold of, and he read them all and studied brain surgery. By the time he was 13, he could do any procedure. And he actually was there working with brain surgeon to age 13. So he knew what he wanted to do, and he wanted to be the greatest brain surgeon in the world. I have no doubt he will achieve this. He was absolutely committed since age 4. I know another girl at age 9 decided she wanted to do dancing and choreography and singing and things of this nature. And she signed at 14, going on 15 years old, a $2.2 million deal with Disney. And at 15, a $5.5 million deal with Disney. So people get focused on something, sometimes young, sometimes older. But most people, because they're suppressed by parental and schooling systems to make drones out of them instead of geniuses out of them, are being suppressed, and they go through a gyration subordinating to outside influences and have to find their way through the journey. Doesn't mean that they can't find it at any time. If they ask the right questions, they can awaken at any time. But most of them are so frightened about not fitting in that they cloud it, and they go wandering around trying to find themselves in the journey. But most people have, you know, the first 10 years of your life you want to play, the second 10 years of your life you want to socialize, the third years you want to find a relationship and a career, and the fourth one you want to find a family and your own business. Fifth one you probably want to have an affair. There's always something going on in each decade. But I just knew when I was 17 I wanted to travel the world and teach. I've been focusing on it 48 years. That hasn't wavered. Some people get clear and they get focused and they sustain. Some people migrate. And there's no wrong or right, there's no better or worse, but just know that the longer the space and time horizons in your mind, the more momentum you will build building it. So my advice is to live by the highest value, you build up the most momentum. Your space and time horizons grow most when you're living congruently with the highest value.
Can I ask, John, I mean, what are your top values? What's core for you?
Well, I think it's pretty evident. Just look at my life. If you look at how I fill my space, how I spend my time, what energizes me, what I spend my money on, what I am most organized in, where I'm most disciplined, what I think about, visualize, internally dialogue to myself about most, the showing evidence, what I converse with other people about, what inspires me, what I want to have as goals, and what I keep wanting to learn about. It's human behavior and maximizing human potential on planet Earth. So I'm a human behavioral focus, and I was involved in study of teaching, healing, and philosophy. That's been my area. I've been doing that, like I said, since 17, and I'm almost 67.
What have you left to learn, John?
Well, there's no end to learning. Whatever you know, there's always a boundary beyond it, which is an infinite boundary that's unknown. So the more I know I don't know, and the more I want to know. So there's no end to it. I don't even know all of what I don't know yet. So I'm constantly on a curve of learning. I read every single day. I study, I learn. I have researchers around the world sending me new information to keep me at the cutting edge. I study and I write every single day. I don't go a day without it.
I was going to say, what would be your method of learning? I mean, what way do you immerse yourself? Are you a reader, listener? What's your preferred method?
All possible mechanisms. I'll watch videos. I'll listen to audios. I'll read books. I'll read online. I'll read magazine articles. I'm anything that might give me some insight. I'll go to lectures. On my ship, I have Nobel Prize winners that come on monthly to educate us on what's going on in their fields. I'm constantly wanting to learn. I think that the thing that makes us different than any other species is we have the capacity to learn and use our minds and learn things more abstract, more conceptual, and a broader perspective. We don't have to live how to survive. We can learn how to thrive. So I'm interested in anything that does with maximizing thrival on planet Earth.
I mean, how common is that line of thinking, do you believe, in terms of, is it, or intrinsically as humans, are we, do we want to do good things? Are we fundamentally all good and we just get a little bit lost on the way, or we take a little detour? Are we good at heart and all there? Well, what's your overall take on that?
I don't use moral languages. I think it's a waste of time using good and bad. I think that's a trivial language personally. I don't promote good or I don't promote evil. What that means is you've biased in your assumption of what people are doing. Whatever you do, somebody could label good and bad, no matter what you do. If somebody comes along to me and says to me, they have a similar value to me and they go, well, you're dedicated, you're perseverant, you're determined, etc. And because they have a similar values, they'll label me that way. But another person has a different set of values. They'll say I'm pig-headed, I'm rigid, I'm not willing to change, and do what they want to do. So I don't pay attention to those moral constructs. I don't pay attention to people's projections. They're just a distraction. I'm interested in doing what inspires, that serves. That's it. And if you want to label it good, great. But I can tell you there's other people that will label it bad because they think that you're not doing what they think is important. So there's people that say, well, you should be doing this and you ought to be doing more of this. I don't pay attention to that. If I let all the people's shoulds and supposeds around my life run my life, I wouldn't get anything done. I wouldn't be me. So I don't focus on those kind of moralities. I go and I do what I can to serve people, and I'm not going to serve everybody. I'm going to serve the people I can serve, and I work at finding out their needs, whatever it is, not judging those needs, finding out those needs and trying to fill those needs. They may have needs that doesn't match my needs, and I may find somebody else that can deliver those needs. But I'm not here to judge what those are, because there's a spectrum all the way across the world. There's a complete spectrum of values out there. And whatever you think is good, somebody else thinks is evil. And whatever you think is evil, somebody else thinks is good. In South Africa, the president has 9 wives. Zuma had 9 wives. In America, you go to prison for that. There, you're honored there. In some countries, they've got women don't drive. In other countries, women's freedom is important. You can't, Montaigne went around the world and tried to find a universally ascended value system and never found it. So I don't get caught in those games. That's a trivial game. It's an amygdala response and labeling and rigiding those things into black and white thinking. I'm more interested in what it is that the individual's inspired to do and giving them freedom to do it, show them the science to do it. And I'm sure that people will like and dislike that, and that's inevitable. I'm not here to be a hero. I'm here to be a hero and villain. I don't try to be one-sided because it's a waste of time. Some people like what I'm doing. Some people will dislike it. I embrace both of those responses. If you're not being crucified, you're probably not on purpose in life.
That's interesting. I mean, so it is a case of you're going to push boundaries, right? You're going to put, well, you're not intentionally pushing boundaries. You're just speaking your version of, your truth, if you like.
Sometimes you are. Sometimes your intent is to do something that other people don't want. You can't avoid it. That's just part of the game. I offend sometimes some psychologists because I've found new ways of dissolving grief and dissolving depression and taking people off medication. So psychiatrists, psychologists sometimes don't like me because I show them how ridiculous their strategies are at times. And in trying to go and get pleased by somebody that you're actually undermining their entire career path, it's unrealistic to expect them to like you. I'm not here to be liked. I'm not here to be disliked. I'm here to fulfill a mission. And I know I'm going to get liked and disliked along the way. Look at Donald Trump. He's had, 75 million supporters and 75 million want to kill him. That's part of the game, man. I sat in Ireland with Martin McAleese and Mary McAleese, with your president, and a number of years ago at that little green White House. I call it the Leprechaun White House. And, we were talking about the issues that were going on in Belfast and Dublin, the Catholic and Protestant issues. And I went up there and did a thing on conflict resolution up there. And they were talking about, that the generation, they keep holding on to the same, injuries of the past instead of moving past it and getting on. And I told them, I said, well, as long as you label something good and bad, you're trapped. Because anything you occupies and that you're infatuated with or resentful to is going to run your life. It's going to stay in your amygdala. It's going to be stored in your subconscious mind. You got to transcend it. You got to find the upsides to the things you think are down and the downsides of the thing you think are up, neutralize it out, liberate yourself, transcend it, and get on with your life. And quit running around trying to please and displease or try to do one or the other, because both of them are going to happen simultaneously. You cannot avoid that. It's like pairs of opposites, like a magnet. You try to if I told you to give me only the positive pull of a magnet, you couldn't do it. You're going to give me to give me a magnet, you got to give me both poles. And life is the same way. To expect life to be one-sided is futile. So I don't try to be one-sided. I don't worry about being nice without being mean, because no matter how hard I've tried, there's times when I'm nice and times when I'm mean. When they come up to me at the airlines and I check in and they say, well, Dr. Demartini, you have 20 million miles on our flying list. We've got you upgraded. We got you in the Crown Lounge or this and that. I go, thank you, thank you, thank you. But if they come up to me and say, well, sorry, but we've overlooked something and we somehow don't have your ticket and there's no way you can fly. And I don't go, peace. I say, well, can I talk to a supervisor? And if they don't come, I talk to a supervisor. If they don't come, I demand Richard Branson to come right to the front desk. I can be tough. I'm not a nice person. I'm not a mean person. I'm a human being, and I have both sides, and I use both of them in order to fulfill my mission of serving people who will like and dislike me. That's the way life is. And we can live in a fantasy about how it's going to be, but that's the way life is. You can't even go through your own day. If you look at your own life, you build yourself up and beat yourself up. And when you get married, you have somebody that builds you up and beats you up. And you have kids, they build you up and beat you up. And you have employees, they'll build you up and beat you up. Life is designed to knock you down when you're cocky and to build you up when you're humble and to get you centered and authentic.
I mean, that's an interesting, I suppose that thinking set. And I'm just wondering then if you can disconnect yourself from those states of emotions coming back at you, which kind of sounds a bit like what you're doing is, the ability to just judge them for not necessarily the reaction, but what's behind the reaction, the sort of the cause rather than the actual effect.
Well, the only thing that they're reacting to is the part of themselves they've disowned. If they're resenting you, it's because you're reminding them of something they've done that they're judging in themselves that they feel ashamed of. And if they're admiring you, it's because they're too humble to admit it, but they've done the same thing and they're proud of it. And the only reason they're hanging out with you or avoiding you is because you're reminding them of the things they admire or despise in themselves. This has been known since the time of Plato and Socrates and Epictetus. I mean, they all mention this. There's nothing new. This, what I'm saying is not new. This is ancient stuff. It's just put in maybe a few words that are different. All I've done is I've studied the classics. I've looked at what runs things. I'm not interested in self-help moral constructs that are self-disempowering. I'm interested in helping people master their life. And mastery embraces both sides of your life. Mastery is not going to come from trying to get rid of half of yourself. You're never going to love yourself trying to get rid of half of yourself. That's a waste of time. I proved that when I turned 28 years old. I realized that's just a waste of time.
Do you need full alignment in your life? I mean, can you leave any sort of couple of 100-pound gorillas sitting around the place, or do you need it all to be in one space? You need to sort of clean out the closet, get everything in alignment to see your true potential, if you like.
It's already in alignment. You just aren't seeing it because you're comparing your current reality to fantasies that you've injected. It's already there. I try to tell people in the breakthrough experience, you're not out of order. You just think you are. You only feel you make a mistake when you compare your actions to other people's values. And the only time you think other people make mistakes when you compare their actions to your values. And the reason why you think there's a mistake is because the feedback of the universe is trying to let you know that's not how to live. It is because you're having an unrealistic expectation on others and on yourself. When you finally realize that you're not here to compare yourself that way, you're here to communicate what you value and know what they are and learn how to communicate what you value in terms of what other people value. And then you don't have these mistakes. You have flow in life. And it's amazing what happens when you do that. Opportunities keep emerging. So the universe is trying to give us feedback. Really, all the symptoms in our physiology, our sociology, our friendships, our loved ones, all the symptoms of our business are feedback mechanisms to guide us to authenticity and priority. It's really that simple. We make it complex, but it's that simple.
Define for us then, I mean, that flow state, just, I mean, do you have a definition for that? Or how would people recognize it?
Well, the most common thing that gentleman wrote about flow, I think, is an error. I know I respect that he went out and did research on it, but what he's considering a manic episode, an ungoverned hypocorticality or hypoexecutive function flow, to me is manic ecstasy states of usually manic illusion. Real flow comes when you're inspired, when you're present, you have objectivity, and you're in fair exchange with people, having compensatory fair exchange for it in transactions, and doing something you love and getting paid for it and doing it and going amazing and accomplishing things and making a contribution to people's lives. When you do these podcasts and you get thank you letters and say, hey, this really made a difference and it changed my life or whatever, there's a certain special, I guess you could say, fulfillment that comes in. And knowing that you've actually done something that's made a contribution to life is fulfillment. And knowing that sometimes you challenge people out there and they weren't ready to hear that. And then a year later, or 5 years later, they come back and go, wow, I wasn't ready to hear that then, but now I am. Thank you. So I'm not really attached to what it is. I just know that I'm going to do something that I feel certain is going to contribute. And in the process of doing that, when people are ready for that, they'll resonate with that. And they don't have to get it now, but I'm still going to deliver it now.
When you talk about, and I love that. I mean, you're standing congruent to your values and who you are and what you do and how you deliver, that focusing, sustaining, maintaining, that alignment's, it's spectacular, really. Then when you're taking that forward to leading your life by design, I mean, is that the values that you pull through? And, are you designing your future, or are you going into the future with that attitude? Maybe not being clear, I suppose, but I'm trying to how much are you?
They both supplement each other. You're doing both. You're going in there by design, by laying out what you want. I wrote out goals that I wanted to do. I wanted to step foot in every country in the face. And every time I get to go to another country, I tick off another one in my metrics. I've been to 154 countries speaking. I still got 60 something to go. So I'm ticking them off as I go, and I'm achieving them. And I went out and accomplished that. The way I live allows me to go there. And I wanted to make sure that I delivered enough service that people would want me to come there. And so that's living by design. And it'd be impossible to convince them you can't do that, because I'm doing it and I'm watching it and I've shown people how to do it and they do it. So it's basically defining what it is you do, and that's not a fantasy. A fantasy is something that's a positive without a negative, and something that's low on your values, that's amygdala driven instead of executive function. And a real goal is something you mitigate the risk, you come up with obstacles, you solve the obstacles, and you keep working towards the goal. And you're relentless in the pursuit of it. You don't stop until you get it. And so those goals are real goals, and those objectives are real accomplished. So I'm a metric freak. I keep records of things so I can look at what worked and what didn't work and refine it and keep moving forward. So I live by design. I designed that out. I have a master plan book. It's 30 volumes thick. It's a massive piece of thing, and I keep metrics. Every radio show, every podcast, every seminar I do, every speaking I do, the numbers I keep metrics of. If I say I'm going to reach a certain number of people, by God, I want it documented to show that I'm doing it. That way I know what I can do different or refine it as I go. So if you're really serious about a goal, you'll metric it, you'll keep record of it, and you will achieve it. If it's not, then it's a fantasy. It's a whim. It's not really important to you. And why waste your time on things that aren't important to you? You're not going to be an important person and do low priority things.
Does that, I mean, that, and I love that sort of separation between a whim and a fantasy and a goal, the separation between the two. Is it just, I mean, if you find that goal, that ultimate objective, that ultimate vision, mission, purpose, does it come with momentum, or is it something it has to be, through sort of emotional behavior?
No, momentum is an incremental thing that you do. When I wanted to teach, I started out learning how to read first, because I didn't read till I was 18. And at age 18, I got a dictionary out and I said, okay, I'm going to memorize 30 words a day. My mom's going to test me on them. I'm going to increase my vocabulary and learn how to pronounce them properly and get the meaning out of them and grow my vocabulary. So at the end of 2 years, if I do 30 words a day and I 365 days, I've got thousands of words by that time. And if I do, my vocabulary is strong enough and I'll be able to read almost anything. So I set out to do that. It was methodical. And I consistently did that and achieved that. And then I got to read anything. It didn't matter what I read. I could read it and comprehend much of it. And if I didn't, I'd learn some new words in the dictionary. So I would expand my awareness further. And that gives me a competitive advantage, because I realized that I had a methodical habit that I developed that allowed me to expedite the expansion of my awareness and potential. And it's not that you can't do that. It's just that if it's meaningful to you, you will. If it's not meaningful to you, you're going after a fantasy. I'm not interested in pursuing something I'm not really committed to, because that's going to self-depreciate you. Anything that's a goal that you're doing that's a fantasy, that it's got a positive without a negative, and it's a fantasy, is going to bring nightmare with it, because you're going to actually pursue something that can't be done by itself. There's always, with every new accomplishment, there'll be challenges along the way. And if you're not prepared for the challenges and all you want is the ease, you're not going to get it. I always say, I said to a lady, I just did a consult with a lady that's worth about $200 million yesterday. And she's trying to get another man, and she can't get a man that has the same generosity that she had with the last man that died, and she inherited 200 million. So she's trying to find a guy that's as generous as him, because with somebody that's got $200 million, not everybody's going to want to be generous to, because they go, well, hell, you got money already. So we're looking at that, and I explained that along with that generosity came a lot of stuff you put up with. She goes, boy, did I. I said, are you willing to put up with the same degree of that stuff? Because if you're not willing to put up with the same challenges, you don't get the same opportunities. Tell me what opportunities you have, and tell me what equal challenges you're willing to face, and I'll tell you what you'll accomplish. But if you set up a fantasy without the downsides, you're going to have a nightmare to balance it without the upsides in your mind, because you don't get one without the other. Nature has a way of bringing pairs of opposites. And this has been known. Heraclitus and all the great philosophers, Parmenides, they all said that there's always a pair of opposites, and there's a unity of the opposites. And if you concentrate on the unity, you embrace the two sides. That's a real goal. That's a real objective. A fantasy is trying to get a one-sided world. Support without challenge, happy without sad, kind without cruel, nice without mean, peace without war. Ain't going to happen. It's only in the minds of deluded people thinking they're going to get a one-sided world. And people haven't learned, and there's decades and decades of people living in a fantasy life, wondering why they're living in quiet lives of desperation. I have no interest in that. Once you learn something, you go past it.
Is it the contrast that brings the power to that? Is it the sort of distance in the polarities? Is that what gives it its intrinsic strength and power?
The only distance in the polarities, is in the human mind. They're never separated. It's the human mind that separates inseparables, divides the indivisibles, labels the unlabellables, names the ineffitables, polarizes the unpolarizables, and splits that which is insplittables. We're the ones that put that into our psyche. Because when we're conscious of one side and unconscious of the other, we split them. The truth is, when you get infatuated with a girl, right, that you like, there's downsides already there, but you're blind. You can't see them. They're there right from the beginning. And your intuition is trying to whisper them to you, but you're too blind by your little dopamine fix and your subjective biases that you're in survival mode. And then you end up procreating and then having children and then go, oh, now I found out that she's not what I thought. And so the same thing on the person you resent. They turn out to be the very people that catalyzed your greatness. You know, sometimes the people that you think are challenging. I was working with a lady from an Israeli leader recently, about a year ago, and she asked me, do I believe in absolute evil? And I said, absolutely not. And she says, well, I do. And I said, well, maybe that's why you're having problems with conflict with somebody, because you're in absolutisms and you can't negotiate from there. She goes, well, that may be true. I said, what's absolute evil? Well, intolerance. I said, where are you intolerant? And she couldn't see it. She couldn't see she was intolerant right on the spot. So I had to show her where I was intolerant. I listed out tons and tons of places I've been intolerant. And finally, she started seeing where she was intolerant. Then I made her look deeper and deeper and deeper until the degree of intolerance she had was equal to the man that she was judging. When she owned the trait, she goes, oh, who am I to judge him? Exactly. Now, what's the benefits of the intolerance? And she says, there is no benefits. I said, no, everything has two sides. What's the benefit side of intolerance? And she finally realized she was a nobody until this intolerant person challenged her and made her go and become a leader and made her write a book and made have her following of people and let her speak out. She was doing nothing with her life until the intolerant person pushed her button and catalyzed her to become a leader. And then she stopped and she got tears in her eyes. She goes, I never saw this. I said, I know you've been blinded by your infatuation with yourself and resentment to him, but you got to realize that he is what made you who you are. And she got really humbled. And she said to the man who was sitting in the room that I was negotiating, she says, I've never actually had a respect for you until this moment. I realize now my very career came from you. And he got humbled. And now we started negotiating. Because as long as we're self-righteously proud and thinking, well, I don't own what they do, I'm too proud to admit what I see in them, you're not going to get anywhere in negotiation. So that's why polarization, one-sidedness, is a sign of subjective survival bias. It's a confirmation, disconfirmation split. It's a false positive split. And it's not going to get you empowerment because you're striving for that which is unobtainable and trying to avoid that which is unavoidable. The Buddha says the desire for that which is unobtainable and the desire to avoid that which is unavoidable is a source of human suffering. And we do. We suffer because we expect life to be one-sided, and it's not going to be. Never has been, never will be. Because we need both sides. Maximum growth and development occurs at the border of support and challenge, kind and cruel. If we had prey without predator, we'd be gluttonous and fat and not fit. If we had predator without prey, we'd be emaciated and skinny and not fit. But if you put prey and predator together on both sides in the ecosystem and the food chain, you have fitness. That's why nature has supporters and challenge, oxidation reduction, right? Or a reduction in oxidation, alkalinity and acidity, build and destroy, mitosis, apoptosis, neuroplasticity, bioplasticity, supporters and challengers in politics. That's why we have both sides, war and peace. We need both. They're both necessary. And to think we're going to get rid of one and only have the other is futile. Mortimer Adler in the great books of the Western world and his Syntopic in volumes 2 talked about peace and war and the essentialness of both. And people think they can get by without it. But those are only wounded people, and wounded people want to escape their wounds of their subconscious mind instead of actually learning from them and growing from them and thanking. So I'm a firm believer in owning both sides, embracing both sides, expecting both sides, be objective, and you will achieve way, way more than banging your head against the wall trying to get a one-sided world.
Achieving that, I mean, is that change of the mindset? Is it a listening? Is it a reviewing of your own, your own sort of echo chamber and saying this may not be the truth? Just being open to challenging yourself, challenging others around you. Is that a useful pattern?
Yeah, but let me just go up to you, okay? So if I come up to you and I said, you go by Pete, right? Sometimes? Okay. Right. So if I go and say to you, Pete, I said, you're always kind, never cruel, always nice, never mean, always pleasant, never unpleasant, always peaceful, never wrathful, always positive, never negative, always generous, never stingy, always giving, never taking, always considerate, never inconsiderate. Would you believe me?
No.
Your BS meter, your intuistat would be going off, and you would immediately be thinking of times when you maybe were crude and negative and conflicting and everything. Your intuition would bring it up immediately. And if I went to you, Pete, and I said, you're always mean, you're never nice, you're always cruel, you're never kind, you're always taking, never generous, always stingy, not generous, always wrathful, never peaceful, always negative, never positive, always inconsiderate, never considerate, would you believe me?
I'd be pissed off.
You wouldn't believe me because you can immediately think with your intuition, no, I've been kind, I've been generous, I've been peaceful, because your mind would automatically pull up the other side if somebody tried to label you that. So there's no way you could ever have certainty on one-sidedness. But if I went to you and I said, Pete, sometimes you're nice, sometimes you're mean, sometimes you're kind, sometimes you're cruel, sometimes you're positive, sometimes you're negative, sometimes you're peaceful, sometimes you're wrathful, sometimes you're generous, sometimes you're stingy, you would immediately go, that's true. You would have absolute certainty that that's true. The only certainty you'll ever have in life is when you're finally objective, embracing both sides of your life. You will never be certain in your life about one-sidedness. That's the uncertainty principle. So I don't try to promote a one-sided thing, a moral hypocrisy that nobody's going to live by, because it's just futile. It sells because it stimulates dopamine. People want to hear that they're going to get peace without war. They're going to get an afterlife that's heaven without a hell. They're going to have salvation without damnation. This is hypocrisy, and people believe it because they want a dopamine fix. But dopes don't become leaders. They become dope addicts. They're looking for the next opium of the masses. I have no interest in that. I learned past that at age 28. That was the end of that. I was vulnerable to that till 28. And I realized that just is not real. So that liberated me to go after embracing both sides of life and get objective. That's what a mathematical equation is trying to do, balance the equation. That's what physics, that's what math, that's what chemistry, that's what all of our psychology is trying to do. Our brain does that. Our neurochemistry, our neuroelectronics, our neuroimaging all point to that. I've been studying neurology and taught neurology back when I was 23, I taught neurology. Been studying it all these years. The brain is a balancing act. It's trying to create you aware of both sides. It's there. It's got a glutamate and GABA, a stimulant and a sedative. It's got the reticular activating system to turn you on and turn you off. It's got excitation and facilitation and inhibition. It's there to balance out the chemistry and balance out the electronics and balance out the mind. So why not just do it? Your autonomic nervous system is tempting you to do it. Your supracosmic nucleus in the forebrain is attempting to do it. All the little cellular cycles in the body are trying to get it. You have a day and night cycle, they're trying to balance it. It's like, duh, wake up. Your physiology is there. Your sociology is smacking you. Your life and psychology is doing it. The only place it's not doing it is in the fantasies sold by the opium sellers, which is medicine, psychology, sociology, and theology, selling you the opium. I call them the H's, the 4 H's of opium. Health, happiness, harmony, and heaven. They sell the fantasy and create the nightmare. Not interested in that. When I was in my 20s, I was receptive to that. I learned past that.
Interesting how almost almost a 10-year cycle type, you're saying a pivotal moment for you, sort of 18, and then again, a sort of a second kick of almost realization at 28. I mean, were those just massive shifts for you? Just moments of realization, moments of clarity, if you like, or
Yeah,
what?
but I wouldn't limit them to that date
Mm,
or only those days, because you have major shifts going on throughout your life, and there you can find a pattern if you look for it. That may not be a real pattern, but the reality is, um, yeah, I think that age 17 and 18, I nearly died, and so that was a turning point. I met an amazing teacher that inspired me. And then I did an experiment at age 28 to 30. So it's actually a 2-year period, not exactly 28. It's a 2-year period of research on the idea of trying to be one-sided. And it's futile, I guarantee it. I guarantee I could take anybody and have them go do the same exercise I did, and they will prove themselves that, and they won't go back. Once you've experienced it, you don't go back. Your brain has been stretched. You're not going back. But people sometimes they don't want to give up their dopamine fix. That's why drugs sell so easily. I haven't had a drug in my body, not an aspirin, not an antibiotic, nothing in 48 years. A drug is not my pathway. External drugs are nothing, absolutely nothing compared to the pharmaceutical you have in your brain. If you know how to if you know how to manage the ratios of your perception, you can change any chemistry you want. You can raise if I asked you and sat down and told you about the things that I like about you and build up your pride, your serotonin will go up. If I started telling you about a fantasy about a business deal that's going to happen, it's going to make you tons of money, I can make your dopamine go up. I can make your oxytocin go up by basically saying things that are making you affectionate towards somebody. I could change any chemistry in your brain on any neurotransmitter, signal molecule, regulator, modulator. Every one of them have ratios of perceptions behind them. If you learn that, you have command of your chemistry. If you don't, you're going to give a pharmaceutical company command over it.
Fundamentally, with the human form, what is that, a survival sort of mechanism, that ability to persuade, dissuade, to converse with others, and as you say, trigger off something, help them to experience something through your language, through your tone, conflict, or your presentation? Is it a nature thing? Is it just survival? Is that what it comes
Well,
down to?
survival is a polarization. An animal in the wild, think about this. An animal in the wild is up against camouflaged other animals that are both prey to try to avoid them and predators try to grab them. So in order for them to deal with that, they have what they call patternicity. Patternicity is they got to be able to see in the camouflage a pattern that might be animate and alive that could be a prey or predator. Then they've got to go in there and take pareidolia and look at the face of it to see if it might be a prey or predator. Then they're going to go to agenticity to see if it's alive. And then they're going to put apophenia there to find out what the meaning is. Then they're going to put a false positive on it to make sure that they get their adrenaline up, because a false positive gives them the idea that it's there even if it's not. Because if they have a false negative and assume that's not there when it is, they could miss out on food or get eaten. So they have to skew it into a false positive to assume that it's there even if it's not. So they got the adrenaline enough to be able to run after it, to capture it, or to get away from it. So these biases are amygdala-based biases, our desire center. They're biases that most people run their life with. And that's survival. That's purely animal survival. And that's no different than the animals, and our emotions are no different from the animals. They come from the animals. But humans have the capacity to go beyond the animal. They have the capacity to be inspired, to have meaning, to actually have objectivity, to actually see both sides, and ask questions and be able to see both sides and not be frightened of the loss of prey or the gain of predator, and be able to master their lives. And that's what I'm interested in. That's thrival. And thrival is a different game. It's intuitive and inspired, not impulsive and instinctual.
Well, that sort of answers my question, I think, actually. Saying what is the greatest human catalyst then?
I think the greatest human catalyst is discovering what really deeply, spontaneously you're committed to, and structuring your life to give you the competitive advantage. The comparative advantage that Ricardo talked about in his economics that every country has is also in every human. And their comparative advantage is the capacity to fulfill what is their strength, the greatest strength. And the greatest strength is always a reflection of what you value most. So sticking to the highest value is the key that gives you the greatest advantage. My highest value is learning. If I stick to that, I got a competitive advantage in the world. Very few people are going to keep up with me on that level. But if I try to be somebody I'm not and go be second at somebody else, I've just lost my competitive advantage.
And what I'm getting there as you speak, so it's almost two things. So one, stepping into your power, stepping into your capability, but the second thing is actually stripping away from the things that are disempowering for you, right? So it's, the things
Well,
that we,
if you try to get rid of those things, it's a waste of time. Focus on what you're focused on, and it takes care of itself. If you didn't focus on your priority and you kept trying to get rid of low priorities, you're going to waste your time. But if you fill your day with high priority things, the low priority things don't have time to come in. If you say no to the low priorities, say yes to high priorities, and fill your day with high priorities, you get way more done. That's why delegation is an essential component of a self-actualized life. If you don't delegate lower priority things and you're trapped doing low priority things, you're going to devalue yourself, and you're going to create symptoms, and you're going to disempower yourself. You're going to offload decisions to other people as a follower instead of being a leader. So yeah, if you want to do that, you'll be sitting there focusing on the problem.
have I lost you, John?
Still seeing you and hearing you.
Oh, I've got you now. Sorry, I lost you there for a sec.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I mean, stepping out your highest value. So by full immersion in that, in your highest value and what's going on, then that by nature then is, you have no time, you have no energy or space for the low priority items. So you're not even giving them the energy to sort of say, I'm not going to focus on you or whatever. It just naturally, they just fall away by pure evolution, I suppose.
If you have somebody that you delegate low priorities to, what have you got to do? You don't need to do. All I do is research, write, and teach. I delegate everything else, so I don't get distracted by that because I have somebody that takes care of that. If somebody says, well, can you do this? I say, contact this email. If somebody says, well, I have people all over the world sending me stuff, wanting me to read stuff, and I filter it. And I say, please send it to so-and-so. They filter it for me. I have somebody that filters it. If it's not something I'm going to want, they say, thank you, but that's not the topic. And they give them a list of topics that I'll research. So I have somebody to delegate everything to. And people say, well, because you got money, you can do that. No, I've got money because I did that. That's the difference. Because if you stick to high priority things that produce the most, that serve the most, you make the most. And when you make the most, you can easily delegate the most. And so it works both ways. If you delegate, you end up making more. And when you make more, you can delegate even more. So it works both ways. So I don't want to sit and do low priority things in my life. Life goes by too quick to be doing low priority things and devaluing yourself all day. There's no got-tos out there. Well, what about my family? No. If your opinion is more important than yours, then you're basically saying that you're devaluing yourself to other people, and you're offloading your decisions to others. As long as you do, you're going to trap yourself.
What you were saying there, about that sort of transformation shift at that early age, and even in through your upbringing. And, a lot of your drive, you're saying you want to travel because you didn't travel when you were younger, and you wanted the money because you didn't have, and things like that. Is there any part of that is void driven, or that's just the catalyst that starts it off?
All of it's void driven.
Okay.
All of it's void driven. Everything is void driven. Aristotle said that in his times. Our voids determine our values. The word fulfillment means filling full the mind. You can't fill something if it's full. So it has to have something that you perceive as empty, or there wouldn't be anything important, because the word important means to bring something and import it into our sphere of awareness and influence. So that which is important is that which is filling voids. So if you feel that you don't know enough, you're going to want to go and learn. If you feel you don't have enough wealth, you're going to want to build your wealth. If you feel you want to have a relationship, you're going to want to go fill the relationship. Whatever you perceive as missing, you want to fill. Now, actuality, nothing's missing, but you haven't awakened to that. So you're going to be fulfilling it until you awaken to it and realize it's in different forms of fulfillment, but it's always there. So as a result of it, learning, can you ever fill all the learning capacities? No, there's always something you can learn tomorrow. I have a prize that I want to compete with the Nobel Prize. I've got a foundation, so I can always grow more wealth to go and do more things with more people and serve more people. So you can continue to grow those things and expand and build in all areas of your life. You know, what are you going to do? You're going to just coast once you reach a point? You know, I always wondered why people think of retirement. I never understood that. But what are you going to do? You're going to coast? Been there, done that? That means that you have a job that you didn't want to do all your life and you finally got out of it? What if you're doing what you love every day? Do you want to take a break from something you love? No. When you love doing it, you don't need a break. Most people have a Monday morning blues, Wednesday hump days, a thank God it's Fridays, and the week friggin' ends, and they live for breaks, for holidays, and for retirement. That's a survival mentality, not thrival. When you're doing something you love doing, look at Warren Buffett. Do you think he's wanting to take a break? He's 90 years old. He's not interested in a break. He's interested in learning. He's interested in serving. I always say when you're doing something that's meaningful and you're making an income doing something meaningful, you become philanthropic. But if you're doing something that's unmeaningful, you become debaucherous. You want to escape. I'm not interested in escaping. I'm interested in fulfilling.
Talk to us a bit about legacy.
Legacy is a natural byproduct of an authentic self, because every time you achieve something that's deeply meaningful, you're going to tend to want to achieve something greater. And eventually the space and time horizons of what your achievement goes beyond your life. And once your achievements are now targeted beyond your life, legacies are born. Seneca, the Roman poet, said very clearly that you measure an individual by their most distant ends. How big is their distance in their ends, that their end in mind, their chief aim that they're wanting for? So I wrote a posthumous biography that's 1,000 years into the future of how I want to be perceived 1,000 years from now. And I'm working on that. And surprisingly, some of it's already come true. I'm amazed. I mean, I've actually blown away by some of the opportunities that have come into my life that's already left a legacy now. I was speaking at the Milk Abbey in Austria, and there was 12 of us speaking, Muhammad Yunus and the Dalai Lama and Wolf Singer, and there was a guy named Paul Nernst, who was a Nobel Prize winner. There's 12 of us speaking, and we're talking about solving world problems and things. And it was just a fascinating, inspiring Sistine Chapel environment at this big abbey. And there were 200 people and dignitaries there, and there was a whole bunch of media all around and everything else. And on Saturday night, they had a special gathering at the end of the last speech. And they brought us into the major library at the Milk Abbey. If you go on the internet and look under the Milk Abbey library, you'll see it. We went in there and they put us in a semicircle, and they handed us a stainless steel cylinder about 12 or so inches long and something. And about that wide, maybe about 3 inches wide, 4 inches wide. And on it says Walsall Conference 2008 or whatever, 2009, I think it was. And what they did is they took 365 quotations from my books and from my speeches. And they took the Demartini method that I've developed on conflict resolution, which I spoke about. And they calligraphied it on scroll paper, and they stuck it in there, and they put a ribbon around it, and they put it in there, and they vacuum sealed it, and they put it in a stainless steel, and then completely sold it into a vacuum tight so it wouldn't be decayed by bacteria. And then we walked down and pranced down to the Infinity of Divinity Library shelf room, which is a vaulted room where they store scrolls and ancient manuscripts for long periods of time under special conditions. And we went in there and stuck this little cylinder on an Infinity of Divinity library shelf that was 12 foot high that you can find if you look online. And there's that cylinder sitting there, and they said that this will be sealed here for 1,000 years. So 1,000 years from now, because I wrote a goal of 1,000-year plan, 1,000 years later, there will be that cylinder. And my principles and teachings that I've said today will now be sitting there. So I'm absolutely a believer that we go around and we say we're immortal souls, but rare do we ever set immortal goals beyond our life. So why not set them? Why not set goals that are distant, that are, but he's probably already thinking about how to get out of the solar system onto the next solar system where life may be. So, you know, he'll be creating a legacy beyond his life, no doubt, because he's got a vision beyond his life.
Have you been here before? Will you be here again in terms of this mortal earth that we're on?
Will I reincarnate, in other words? Is that the question?
Yeah, I suppose it's
I don't know the answer to that. I have no proof one way or the other. What it looks like, my body's dust to dust. Maybe my mind is light to light. But I did have a very spooky thing happen to me back in, 1990 something. I would have to look at the exact date, 1992, I think. I was sitting in London and Alan Bacon was lecturing on healthcare. And during that time, I closed my eyes and I wrote a note and I got really inspired and I saw a vision. And I saw myself in this special room and I could describe that room. I can still see the room today. And there were 3 gentlemen in there and they were all kind of in a somber mood. And some of them had longer hair and they had robe on and it was quite an interesting thing. And it was around, the year looked like it was around the 1700 something. It was a really strange vision. And I thought, well, that's interesting. And I quickly got a piece of paper out and I wrote this whole thing down. And there's probably just some dissociation in my brain, but I wrote it down because it was so intriguing and I was in tears in my eyes. And I thought, whoa, what is this? So I had to capture what was in my mind and I wrote it down. And I just did that, folded it up and kept that just in case that had some meaning somewhere in my life. And then about 10 years later, I'm sitting doing a program on science, religion, and philosophies of the world for a 10-day experience. And one of the days, all of a sudden, I had another one of those moments. But this time I was all of a sudden at the same individuals in the same location. And I remember the same room and I went to the same room and I remember walking up these steps and going out on the balcony and seeing there was an observatory on the top of the balcony looking out into the heavens. And then all of a sudden I realized it was 1776. And then I saw this gentleman, one of the gentlemen, and he said, our master has passed away. He has died. Who of us is going to take on the school? And what's interesting, I thought and sensed it was going to be me. And then this gentleman and the other gentleman said, you're the one to do it. And so I decided I was going to take on the school. And the school was a school of astronomy. And I thought, wow, that's very fascinating. I've written many books on astronomy. I've written a textbook on astrophysics. I'm getting ready to be in a movie with Stephen Hawking. And when I was 4 years old, I was drawing pictures of the asterisms of the moon and the sky and thing at night when I was 4, mapping out the heavens. Don't know. I can't prove one way or the other, but it was certainly spooky. All I know is that I had tears in my eyes and I was there and it was lucid. Made you wonder. It may have just been a dissociation. I can't prove one way or the other. There's no proof. But it was just one of those things you wonder, and why I've been so fascinated and why I've written so much and read so much on that field. Because I've always talked about having an astronomical vision to make a difference on the planet. Can't prove it one way or the other. So I don't know the answer to that.
No, absolutely. I'm curious. I mean, does life, do you live life or does life live you? I mean, where do you go?
Well, it looks like our physiology, we can account for most of our physiological systems and our atoms. The elements return to their cycles. The gases go to gas, the solids go to solids and eventually get decayed by bacteria. Everything is recycled down to its elements and rebuilt somewhere else. Food for something. We're all worm food, as some people say. As Ernest Becker says, it's all worm food. But there's something also about our consciousness. We know that there's a conservation of information in physics. And we know that now Susskind there in his work at Stanford basically says that in a black hole, it looks like information from the star goes into the black hole and is not lost. It either on the edge of the hairy edge of the black hole there at the horizon, maybe it then goes back out and then is reused again. So right now, Stephen Hawking, before he died, actually looked into that model. And Susskind and him had debates on this, and Susskind usually won the debates on this, but it looks like information conserved. And information, when I went to Freeman Dyson at the Institute of Advanced Studies, who took over Albert Einstein's position there, I asked him, what do you think happens in the universe if it was to continue to expand and eventually have a heat death universe? Not that that's the case, but if it did, what would happen to consciousness and intelligence? He said it would be stored and conserved in charged particles of light. And so he believed that the charged particles of light stored information. So I wrote a book on the conservation of energy and the conservation of matter and the conservation of information in charged particles in nuclear physics. So I think that there's a way of demonstrating the conservation of intelligence that goes beyond that, that's sitting in a gaseous domain and a plasma domain that we are going to someday uncover. And maybe we'll realize that dust to dust and light to light, and maybe there's no loss of anything. Maybe there's a conservation of stuff. And maybe we are been looking in a metaphysical way instead of actually getting down to the physics of how it works.
That's kind of, it's like, but it is, as you say, it's just the changing of form, but the consciousness takes, I suppose, in that instance, that it's taking a form with it, though it has a learning or memory, or it has something, or an awareness and knowingness.
Well, I'll share you a mind-blowing, interesting thing. In Melbourne, Australia, 17, 18, no, more than that, 20-something years ago, I was teaching the breakthrough experience. We had a 57-year-old woman there who was resentful to her mom, who was 76, 19 years older. And she was doing the Demartini method on the conflict resolution on this. And she worked in it into the evening until about 11 o'clock at night. And there was also a gentleman there that was supposed to come to the program by himself, but all of a sudden his ex-wife dumped off the daughter with him, and he had to bring his daughter, who was 11, to the program. Now, normally that's not the age it typically comes, but he had no choice but to bring her. So she was sitting there drawing and listening to music and in the corner and kind of minding her own business and being very, respectful. It's really amazing. She's patient. But all of a sudden, this 57-year-old woman, when I asked her, do you feel grateful now for your mom? And she had tears in her eyes. And she says, I had no idea, because I had her own everything she had resented in her mother and own where she had done it, found out the benefits of it, found out if she had done the opposite, what had been the drawbacks. I mean, I held her going there until she's actually in a grace over it. And I said, so who here reminds you and can act as a surrogate of your mother here? And she looks around the room, and all of a sudden she looks at this 11-year-old girl. She says, I don't know why, but this 11-year-old girl reminds me of my mom. I said, Chris, bring your daughter over here. So I got this little 11-year-old daughter sitting across from her. And this girl didn't know what was going down. She'd never been to this course. She sits directly across, literally 1.5 feet away from this woman. And this woman, 57 years old, starts crying. And she says, Mom, I really had no idea how much you love me and how much you've done for me. It wasn't until today that I realized that you're the greatest, Mom. Thank you. And she just opened her heart for her mom. And all of a sudden, this 11-year-old girl reaches up and strokes her hair with the left hand, with a palsy in her left hand, a shaking palsy, and strokes the left side of her hair and says, oh, my dear, precious little angel, I'll never forget the days your eyes opened up. You've been my precious little angel your whole life, my dear. I've loved you your whole life. You have no idea what this means to me to hear you say this. I've waited so long. I love you, my dear. You're my special little angel. You'll always be my angel. Now that whole room was in tears. And that lady was blown away. When she finally hugged the girl as if it was her mom and came out of the hug, she turned to me and she said, how on earth does that young girl know the nickname that my mom called me, precious little angel? How did she know my mom had a palsy in the left hand? How did she know that she stroked my left side, the left side of my head like that? How did she do that? And I said, don't know. All I know is that she's in a state of presence. When you're in a state of presence, time and space don't have meaning. And you kind of translate to a different domain. And if you see this week after week after week, like I see in the breakthrough experience, you start to wonder, is there a conservation of information? Is it accessible? And makes you wonder things like that. I could tell you more interesting stories, but that's just one. That's a classical story that I see almost every single week. So I don't know the answer to that with certainty. I have theories about it. I can make up the theories, but I do have certainty that if we love and appreciate somebody and we live by our highest values and we get objective, we have more synchronicities, more special moments where we get more in awe and more grateful for our existence.
Wow. Actually gives me goosebumps, even just that level of, as you say, the space and time being just being nothing. It's
I've
wow.
had many of those. That's not, I could go over story after story of those things. I see them every week.
Do you foresee that? I mean, do you sense when things are happen or change, or can you foresee like changes in people before they, I don't know. Can you see stuff in people?
When I help them get centered, and I help them get present, and I help them get to be authentic, they have access to way more than what they normally survive with. There's a transcendental mind and there's an immanent mind, according to Immanuel Kant. And the immanent mind is the animal survival. It's a reflexive mind. But the transcendent mind is a reflective mind. And when it reflects, there's nothing missing in it. And that transcendental mind has no space and time limitation. St. Augustine does a great job on this. If you ever read his discussions on time, past, future, does it exist? Where does it exist? Is it in the mind? Is it real? And so does Brian Greene in his little Fabric of the Cosmos, describes this from a modern scientific perspective. Same idea, just different wording. The symmetry of the mind. If we had perfect symmetry, if we had a cue ball that was perfectly white, we can't tell if we spin it where past and future is. But on an Earth, because there's different terrains, we can identify 86,400 seconds in a day. And this is an idea of time that we concocted in our mind, that we artificially created. But if we get present, we can transcend this time. And I do this every weekend in the breakthrough experience with the Demartini method. And I help people get really present with things that they've judged. When you're in a state of judgment, you add time and space to the mind. When you're in a state of grace, you transcend space and time to the mind. Empedocles, the Greek philosopher, pre-Socratic philosopher, said that there's love and strife. When you're in your transcendental mind, you experience love, which is a synthesis and synchronous of all opposites where there's no space and time and you're present. And when there's space and time, you have strife, where you now contrast and judge. And Heraclitus said to it, those in the world of contrast, there's pairs of opposites, and they're always in pairs. And there's actually an underlying unity in them. And if you actually are in a state of love, you get to experience the unity behind them all. And otherwise, you'll be caught by the imposters. And Kipling calls those judgments imposters of perception. And the dialectic is our oscillating subjective bias of those imposters. But if we transcend them and become present, we have another transcendental experience. And that's where you could call, as Hegel described, as the spiritual experience. It's the synthesis and synchronous of all opposites. And I think that's what Will Durant in his, things of countries around the world, his exploration of countries, showed that all the cultural development around the world was really a synthesis, a syncretic integration of the pairs of opposites of awareness, the biases of awareness in our search for truth. And so, yeah, I think we have access to that transcendental state. And it's a state of excellence, a state of symmetrical beauty, a state of awe.
Yeah, I mean, you hit the likes of the, sort of out of body experiences, certain accidents or whatever, and time and everything warps, right? It's just, people don't know whether it was 1 second or 1 year or what's going on. It's just we're separated from our sort of normal physical body and a normal state of presence and mind. Who knows?
Well, we have near-death experiences, but we now know that the brain, we know that we can have the heart stop. This is new research. The heart can stop, and you got seconds to minutes before the brain, right, is shut with glucose and everything. But what's interesting is supposedly when the heart stops and you have heart death, consciousness is supposed to stop, but that's not the case. They've got plenty of cases of people
Mm.
that between those 4 minutes have perfect conscious awareness, even though there's no blood circulating. So that means that if there's no blood circulating and there's no oxygen, and somehow we have the capacity in certain cells to continue to function. So now they're exploring this little gap, this near-death gap between when the heart stops and when the brain actually stops. And they're different. And yet that whole, because there's now evidence of people, even though their heart stopped, they can have information of what was there on the table when the heart stopped. And they can have information. So they have awareness of what the doctors are saying after the heart stopped, trying to get the heart back up again, electrically trying to stimulate it. And they're hearing everything. So they're, even though there's no blood going to the cells, somehow there's a mental function, a transcendental function. And there's a spontaneity in the brain, spontaneous firing in the nerves that somehow transcend what is called the evoked potentials. It's called spontaneous potentials. So we're learning more about the brain as we go along. And I think some of these mysteries will be eventually solved. And there'll be fascinating things. We put metaphysical twist on them until we find out how they physically work.
My mind, I think, is just expanded to a whole another level. I want to be respectful of your time because I know you've got a hectic schedule. So tell me, just if you were to describe your fire in the belly in 1 or 2 words, what would that be?
I love researching, writing, and teaching, and traveling now on Zoom until I get back on the road. And that's what I love doing. That's what gives me fire in the belly. Studying. I've studied 299 different disciplines. I made it a goal to study at least 100 books in each discipline to try to find the most universal principles that I could build a foundation of knowledge on. And then I wanted to disseminate that to whoever and wherever around the world that people be interested in. And I continue to do that and love doing that. And I'm inspired to do that. And I'm just as inspired today as I was when I was 17, 18, when I had the dream to do that. And so I hope to do that and continue to do that on ever greater scales from now on. And I'll probably do that in the afterlife. When I die, I'll probably have all my students get some Ouija boards, and we'll talk on Ouija boards if we have to.
Just with all those books, I mean, do you have original thought, or is it just unique thought?
Original thinking emerges spontaneously when you find the synthesis and syncretic integration of other great minds. You'll see all the biases. You'll see a bias, you'll see an anti-bias, and then you'll see the synthesis of that, and you'll come up with an original way of articulating it beyond opinions. So yeah, I'm sure that there's a vast amount of things that I have that's not original, but there's also things that are original. My Demartini method is an original piece of work. Some of my work on the grief systems that I've just finished a book on is an original piece of work. Some of my work in physics and mathematics is original work. So yeah, you can create original work that hasn't been read anywhere. It may be out there by somebody, but I haven't seen it. So it is doable. And I think that the more authentic you are, the more original you'll be.
I love it. I love it. Best place for people to go if they want to learn more, hear more, obviously your books and things like that. drdemartini.com, I believe, is the place to go. Yeah,
just drdemartini.com. They can spend the rest of their life just going and exploring just the YouTube videos, the webinars, the newspapers, the magazine articles, everything. Because I do a lot of writing and do a lot of YouTubing and stuff, so they could spend their life on there. And yeah, just drdemartini.com. I've got my own podcast. They can go and do the value determination process. If they go on my website, determine your values, look that up, and do that little exercise. It's free, it's private, it doesn't cost anything, and it's an eye opener.
Final message you would like to leave with our guests?
Yeah, whoever's bold enough to listen to all this, all I can say is that the magnificence of who you are is far greater than any fantasies you'll ever impose on yourself. So probe deeper beyond the shell and the facade, the mask, and go into the real core you, because you're going to be number one at you, and you're always going to be second or third or fourth at being somebody else. So give yourself permission to shine, because from there you shine, and from everywhere else you shrink. So give yourself permission to do something extraordinary on the planet. That's what you're here for.
Awesome. Absolutely gratitude for coming on today, Dr. John Demartini. I appreciate you. I appreciate your sharing of that. I might need to go and piece my brain back together again. There's so many lessons there, but yeah, I thank you for your time and thank you for your service.
Yeah, well, thank you. And thank you for the opportunity to ask all those questions. They're great questions. I don't get some of those questions too often. So thank you very much. And may your podcast reach the people and touch the lives that you hold.
Thank you. I appreciate you.